In a world where wealth commands attention, one woman learns the hard way that money can't buy class. When a rich socialite humiliates Big Shaq's mother in an elite jewelry store, she expects silence. What she gets instead stuns the entire room. The air shifts, the power flips, and what unfolds is a masterclass in respect, humility, and the kind of wealth that can't be measured in diamonds. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. The city was alive with a quiet hum of luxury. Towering skyscrapers reflected the golden sunlight, and the streets bustled with high-end cars gliding past designer boutiques. In the heart of this district stood Regency Jewelers, a store so exclusive that only the wealthiest dared to step inside. It wasn't just a store, it was a statement. The kind of place where diamonds weren't just sold, they were presented, as if meant for royalty. Big Shaq pulled up to the curb in his sleek black Rolls Royce. The moment he stepped out, heads turned. Not because of his fame, many in this part of town weren't basketball fans, but because of his sheer presence. He wasn't just tall, he was commanding, towering over the valet as he walked around the car. Despite his immense success, he carried himself with an effortless ease, his demeanor warm and approachable rather than intimidating. His mother, Shaquille O'Neal, sat patiently in the passenger seat, a soft smile on her face. Shaq opened the door for her, offering his hand like a true gentleman. She chuckled, shaking her head. "Boy, you still treating me like I'm fragile?" she teased. "You'll always be my queen, Mama," Shaq replied, grinning. Lucille took his hand, stepping onto the pavement with the grace of a woman who had seen life in all its shades, struggle, joy, and everything in between. She adjusted her simple yet elegant beige coat, looking up at the massive store in front of them. "This place looks fancy," she murmured. "It is," Shaq said, leading her toward the entrance. "And you deserve the best." As they stepped inside, the air changed. The scent of polished wood and expensive perfume filled the room. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling glow over the showroom, where glass cases displayed rare, breathtaking jewelry. Diamonds the size of fingertips, emeralds with deep green hues, and sapphires so blue they seemed almost unreal. The elite clientele moved gracefully through the space, wealthy businessmen, socialites, and celebrities, all dressed in designer brands, their jewelry catching the light with every turn. Shaq and Lucille, however, were dressed simply. Shaq wore a well-fitted yet casual sweater and jeans, while Lucille had on a comfortable cardigan over a modest dress. Compared to the extravagance around them, they stood out, not because of their wealth, but because they didn't feel the need to flaunt it. From behind one of the counters, an elegantly dressed saleswoman glanced at them. Her eyes flickered with curiosity, then narrowed ever so slightly. Without saying a word, she turned her attention back to a couple she was helping, a wealthy man and his impeccably dressed wife, dripping in gold and diamonds. Lucille looked around, her eyes filled with wonder. "Shaquille, these pieces must cost a fortune," she whispered. "They do," Shaq said. "But today, price don't matter. We're here for you." Lucille shook her head, touched by his generosity. "I don't need anything fancy, baby." Shaq smiled. "Mama, when I was a kid, you sacrificed everything for me. You deserve something nice." Lucille sighed, clearly reluctant, but her son's love was unwavering. She let him lead her toward one of the glass cases, where a stunning necklace rested on a velvet cushion. The diamonds shimmered like stars, catching the light with every movement. Before they could admire it properly, a soft murmur spread through the store. Customers were noticing them, particularly Shaq's towering figure. Some recognized him instantly, their expressions shifting from curiosity to surprise and intrigue. Near the counter, a wealthy woman with sharp features and an air of arrogance observed them with a smirk. She was draped in a designer coat, her wrists adorned with platinum bracelets. Next to her, an older gentleman, presumably her husband, adjusted the expensive watch on his wrist. She leaned toward him, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "Oh, look, another one of those athletes wasting money on things they don't understand." Her husband chuckled. "It's always the same, isn't it? A little fame, a little money, and they think they belong here. Lucille didn't hear the remark, but Shaq did. His jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second, but he didn't react. He had heard far worse in his life. Instead of responding, he focused on his mother, determined to keep this moment about her. A young, polite sales associate approached them with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, sir. May I help you with something?" Shaq nodded toward the necklace. "My mom deserves something special. I think this one's perfect." The associate was about to respond when a senior salesperson, a thin woman with an icy expression, stepped in. Her gaze swept over Shaq and Lucille, lingering for a second too long. "That's one of our most exclusive pieces," she said, her voice smooth but laced with skepticism. "Are you sure you're looking in the right section?" Lucille's smile faltered slightly, but Shaq remained calm. He wasn't surprised by the doubt in her voice. He had seen it before, the assumption that his kind didn't belong in places like this. He met the woman's gaze with a polite yet firm expression. "I don't usually pick the wrong section," he said evenly. The associate hesitated, but before she could respond, the wealthy woman from earlier decided to insert herself into the conversation. She turned slightly, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Oh, sweetheart, maybe something more modest would be better," she said, eyes locking onto Lucille's cardigan. "No offense, of course, but some pieces just don't suit everyone." Lucille's face remained neutral, but the subtle flicker in her eyes told Shaq she felt the sting. Still, he refused to let anger take over. Instead, he smiled, slow and deliberate. "You know," he said, keeping his tone light, "it's funny how people assume they know what others deserve." The woman blinked, caught off guard by his response. Shaq turned back to the saleswoman. "We'd like to see the necklace," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The associate hesitated for a brief moment, then, sensing the shift in power, carefully unlocked the glass case. As she lifted the necklace out, the diamonds catching the light in dazzling reflections, Lucille's eyes softened. "Oh, Shaquille," she murmured. "It's beautiful." The socialite woman scoffed quietly, but Shaq ignored her. He only had eyes for his mother, who, for the first time since stepping into the store, allowed herself to feel worthy of something this grand. As Lucille reached out to touch the necklace, the room felt charged, a quiet tension lingering in the air. People were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. The judgment had started, but the lesson? That was yet to come. As Shaq and Lucille moved deeper into the store, the atmosphere shifted. The air inside Regency Jewelers was already thick with exclusivity. But now, there was something else. An unspoken tension, an energy that wrapped around them like a cold breeze. The kind of feeling that made even the most confident person hesitate for a moment, wondering if they were truly welcome. Lucille, ever the dignified woman, remained unaware of the subtle shift. She was too focused on the beautiful pieces of jewelry around her, admiring the craftsmanship, the way the light bounced off the diamonds. But Shaq noticed everything. He always did. It started with the glances, quick, fleeting, but unmistakable. A sales associate behind one of the cases looked up, saw them, and immediately looked away, turning her attention to a different customer. A well-dressed couple near the pearl collection exchanged a look, their lips pursing in silent judgment, before pretending to continue their conversation. Then came the whispers. "Is that who I think it is?" A woman murmured behind a display of sapphire earrings. "Yes, that's him," her companion whispered back. "Shaquille O'Neal. But what's he doing here? And who's that woman with him?" Shaq wasn't new to this kind of scrutiny. He had seen it in different forms all his life, on the basketball court, in business meetings at high-end restaurants. People were always quick to categorize him, to make assumptions. But today, he wasn't here as Shaq, the millionaire, or Shaq, the NBA legend. Today, he was just a son, wanting to do something special for his mother. Lucille, oblivious to the stares, stopped in front of an elegant ruby necklace, her eyes softening. "This reminds me of a piece my grandmother used to have," she mused, a nostalgic smile forming. Shaq grinned. "Then we should take a closer look." But before he could call an associate, A new voice cut through the air, a sharp, condescending tone from across the room. "Well, would you look at that?" a woman drawled, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Some people really do think money can buy them class." The words were coated in sugar but dripped with poison. Shaq turned slightly, his gaze locking onto the speaker. She stood near a glass case displaying diamond-studded bracelets, surrounded by a few other well-dressed socialites, all of whom looked like they belonged in a high society magazine. She was tall, blonde, and effortlessly glamorous, the kind of woman who was used to commanding attention. Her name, though Shaq didn't know it yet, was Victoria Harrington, and in her world, people like Shaq and Lucille were nothing more than uninvited guests. One of the women beside Victoria smirked, sipping from a champagne flute. "It's cute, really," she said, "like watching a child play dress-up." Shaq exhaled slowly, keeping his expression neutral. His mother still hadn't noticed, too focused on the jewelry, and that was how he wanted it to stay. But Victoria wasn't done. She tilted her head, speaking louder, ensuring there was no mistaking her words. "I just don't understand why certain types of people feel the need to pretend they belong," she said. "It's embarrassing, really. Some places just aren't for everyone." This time, Lucille heard it. She froze, her fingers brushing against the glass counter, her posture stiffening for just a fraction of a second. It was subtle, so subtle that most wouldn't have noticed. But Shaq did. She didn't turn around. She didn't engage. Instead, she did what she had always done in the face of ignorance. She held her head high and ignored it. But Shaq? He felt something stirred deep inside him. He wasn't angry. No, anger was too easy. He had learned long ago that anger only gave people like Victoria power. Instead, he smiled. A slow, knowing, dangerous smile. Without looking at Victoria, he spoke, his voice calm, steady, carrying just enough weight that everyone nearby could hear. "You ever notice how the people who talk about class the most?" He let the words hang, the silence thick between them. "Usually don't have any?" A ripple of quiet laughter spread among a few nearby customers. Even some of the store's staff fought back smiles. Victoria's face twitched. For the first time, she hesitated, clearly not expecting Shaq to respond. She had assumed he would ignore her, maybe even walk away. But instead, he had turned the mirror right back on her. Lucille, still calm, but now fully aware of what was happening, touched her son's arm. "Shaquille," she said softly. "Let it be." Shaq met his mother's gaze and saw the quiet plea there. She didn't want a scene. She never did. So, he let it be. For now. Instead, he turned to the nearest sales associate, the one who had ignored them earlier. "My mother would like to see this necklace," he said, nodding toward the ruby piece. The associate hesitated. Then, glancing quickly at Victoria, she cleared her throat. "Of course, sir," she said, though there was something in her voice, a forced politeness, not genuine respect. Still, she reached for the keys, unlocking the display. Victoria, clearly irritated at being brushed off, scoffed. "I suppose there's no harm in looking," she muttered. "Not that it matters. It's not like you'll actually—" She stopped herself, but the implication was clear. Not that you'll actually buy it. Shaq didn't react. Instead, he turned to his mother, giving her his full attention. "Try it on, Mama," he said, his voice warm, unwavering. Lucille hesitated, but after a moment, she reached for the necklace. As the associate carefully draped it around her neck, something changed. The whispers grew softer. The judgmental looks weren't as bold. The room had shifted again, but this time in Shaq's favor. Because now, people were realizing who he was. Recognition flickered across faces. The murmurs changed from snide remarks to hushed excitement. "Wait, that's really Shaq? Shaquille O'Neal? The basketball legend? Did she just insult Shaq?" Even Victoria sensed the shift. Her smug expression faltered, just slightly. Lucille touched the necklace, admiring it in the mirror. For the first time since entering the store, her smile was genuine. Shaq saw it and knew. That alone made this moment worth it. But he wasn't done yet. As the tension in the room hung thick, as Victoria tried to recalculate her position, As the store employees suddenly realized they might have made a mistake, Shaq simply smiled again. "Wrap it up," he said casually. "We'll take it." And just like that, the game had changed. Victoria's lips parted in surprise. The sales associate stumbled over her words, suddenly eager to assist. Shaq wasn't sure what satisfied him more, buying the necklace for his mother, or the way Victoria's perfectly curated world had just cracked in front of everyone. Either way, this was just the beginning. The lesson was far from over. The ruby necklace shimmered around Lucille's neck, its deep red glow reflecting against her warm brown skin. She touched it lightly, tilting her head in admiration. The moment should have been beautiful, a son seeing his mother adorned with something she deserved, something that symbolizes gratitude, love, and sacrifice. But the moment didn't last. Across the room, Victoria Harrington let out a short, sharp laugh, the sound cutting through the store's quiet luxury like a blade. Several heads turned, sensing something brewing. "Oh, this is rich," she said, her voice carrying an air of exaggerated amusement. She turned to her circle of socialites, shaking her head as if she had just heard a ridiculous joke. Lucille stiffened, her fingers still resting on the necklace. Shaq, standing beside her, didn't react immediately. He had been in too many rooms like this, too many situations like this to act without thought. But that didn't mean he didn't feel it. The slow burn deep in his chest. Victoria took a step closer, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. "I have to ask," she continued, still pretending to find humor in the situation. "Are you actually thinking about buying that? Or are we just playing pretend today?" Lucille's lips parted slightly, as if unsure whether she had truly heard what she just heard. Her hands dropped from the necklace, resting at her sides. Shaq saw it, the flicker of hurt in his mother's eyes. The quiet, almost invisible shrinking of a woman who had spent her entire life being strong. His jaw tensed. Victoria wasn't done. She gave Lucille a slow once-over, eyes trailing from her simple cardigan to her comfortable shoes. Clothes chosen for their familiarity, not their price tags. Clothes that, to Victoria, screamed unworthy. "I mean, let's be realistic," Victoria continued, now speaking as if Shaq and Lucille weren't even there. "Some things just aren't meant for everyone, and that necklace? Oh, sweetheart, it's just a little out of your league, don't you think?" A couple nearby exchanged uneasy glances, clearly aware that the situation was escalating. A younger store employee, standing behind a different counter, shifted uncomfortably, looking toward the manager, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. But the store manager didn't move. He had been watching from the moment Shaq and Lucille walked in, his gaze calculating. And now, as Victoria spewed her condescension, he simply adjusted the cuff of his expensive suit and turned his focus to something else, as if this interaction wasn't worth his attention. Lucille finally found her voice, her tone controlled but undeniably cool. "I don't recall asking for your opinion," she said, looking Victoria directly in the eyes. Victoria smiled, slow and smug, the way a cat might smile at a cornered mouse. "Oh, darling, I'm just trying to help. This store can be a bit overwhelming for first-timers." Lucille's expression didn't falter, but Shaq saw the way her fingers curled slightly, the way her body held tension it hadn't held a moment ago. That was it. That was enough. Shaq stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over Victoria without him even trying. He moved with calm precision, his energy shifting in a way that made the room just a little tighter, the air a little thicker. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a knowing one. A dangerous one. "That's funny," he said smoothly, his voice deep and unshaken. "Because I was just about to say the same thing to you." Victoria's confidence flickered for half a second. "Excuse me?" Shaq turned his gaze to the necklace still resting against his mother's collarbone. "You said some things aren't meant for everyone, and you know what? You're right." His eyes slid back to Victoria. "Like kindness, and class, and basic human decency. Some people just don't have it in them." A quiet oof of appreciation came from somewhere behind him. One of the younger sales associates, who had been watching in silence, quickly turned away, pretending to reorganize a case of engagement rings. Victoria's smile twitched, but she recovered quickly. I see what you're trying to do, she said, crossing her arms. And I'm not impressed. Shaq tilted his head slightly. That's okay. I wasn't really trying. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but one of her socialite friends touched her arm lightly, whispering something in her ear. Shaq didn't hear the words, but he knew exactly what was being said. That's Shaquille O'Neal. The recognition was finally sinking in. The whispers around the store were shifting. Customers who had originally dismissed him as just another man who didn't belong were now piecing it together. But Shaq wasn't interested in using his name as a shield. He had spent his whole life proving himself without ever needing to announce who he was. Victoria, however, still didn't back down. She let out a small scoff, shaking her head as if this whole thing was beneath her. This is ridiculous, she muttered, turning her gaze back to the saleswoman holding the jewelry case open. I don't know why we're wasting time. Let's get back to real business, shall we? Shaq's smile faded. He turned to the store manager, who had been silently pretending not to hear anything. So, this is how you run your business? He asked, his voice level. You let your customers get talked down to? Let people insult them in front of everyone? The manager hesitated, as if debating whether it was worth getting involved. His eyes flickered between Shaq and Victoria, one a powerful millionaire, the other old money elite. Then he made his choice. Sir, the manager said smoothly, hands clasped in front of him. I assure you, we at Regency Jewelers value all our customers, but sometimes certain expectations must be. Shaq held up a hand, cutting him off. I'm going to stop you right there. The manager blinked. Shaq turned back to his mother, his face softening instantly. You like it, Mama? He asked, gesturing to the necklace. Lucille hesitated. Not because she didn't love it, but because she hated feeling like she was part of a fight she never asked for. But when she looked at her son, the boy she raised into a man who wouldn't let anyone make her feel small, she nodded. Shaq turned back to the sales associate still holding the velvet tray. Wrap it up, he said, his voice steady. We'll take it. The associate nearly dropped the tray in surprise. Oh, of course, sir. Victoria's expression cracked, just slightly. Shaq didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He had already won. As the associate hurried to package the necklace, the silence in the store was thick with a mix of tension, embarrassment, and something else. Respect. People were watching, understanding now that they had made a mistake. Victoria? She was seething. She didn't like losing, especially not to someone she had assumed was beneath her. But Shaq had never been beneath anyone, and he never would be. As he took the neatly wrapped box from the associate and handed it to his mother, he smiled. This time, a real smile. Let's go, Mama. And just like that, they walked out. Stronger, unshaken, untouchable. But this wasn't over yet. The moment Shaq and Lucille turned toward the checkout counter, the mood in the store shifted again. The transaction should have been smooth, routine even. But in places like this, for people like them, it never was. The store employees had spent the past half hour ignoring them, whispering about them, judging them. Now, faced with the reality that Shaquille O'Neal was actually buying a luxury item, some of them were scrambling to adjust their attitudes. Others, however, were doubling down. The store manager, a middle-aged man with slicked back hair and a name tag that read Richard Davenport, walked over with practiced authority. He had the look of a man who had spent his career catering to old money and high society, ensuring that places like Regency Jewelers remained exclusive, untouchable, controlled. Sir, Richard said smoothly, stepping in just as the young sales associate was about to ring up the purchase. Are you certain this is the piece you want? Shaq raised an eyebrow. Yeah, I said we'd take it. Richard nodded, but his expression remained tight, calculating. It's just that we have other selections that might be more suitable. Lucille, who had been admiring the necklace in its box, looked up, confusion flickering across her face. I think this one is beautiful, she said simply. Shaq's eyes didn't leave the manager. What exactly do you mean by more suitable? Richard gave a polite, almost sympathetic smile, the kind that wasn't really meant to comfort, just to control. We pride ourselves on offering a wide range of collections. Some of our more exclusive pieces might be a better fit. Shaq let the words settle. He knew exactly what the manager was doing. He wasn't questioning the purchase, he was questioning the buyer. Before Shaq could respond, another saleswoman standing a few feet away spoke up. She was in her 50s, her posture stiff with disapproval. If you're looking for something a little more reasonable, we have a partner store a few blocks down that carries elegant yet... She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Lucille's modest cardigan. Affordable options. A heavy silence followed. Lucille's hand, which had been resting on the box, slowly withdrew. Her face was carefully neutral, but Shaq had spent his whole life watching his mother hide emotions she didn't want the world to see. She had been embarrassed before, but this was something else. Shaq turned toward the saleswoman, his expression unreadable. You think I can't afford this? The woman hesitated. I didn't mean that, sir. I just thought... Didn't mean what? Shaq interrupted, his voice still calm. Didn't mean to assume we don't belong here? Didn't mean to suggest we should leave? The woman flushed, but Richard, sensing the shift in tension, quickly stepped in. No one is suggesting that, Mr. O'Neal, he said, his voice still carefully controlled. But as I'm sure you understand, we have certain standards for how we conduct business. We want to ensure that every transaction aligns with the integrity of our brand. Shaq stared at him, unblinking. Richard had said a lot without actually saying anything. Shaq had been in enough rooms like this, had heard enough carefully coded language to know exactly what was happening. This wasn't about a necklace. This was about control. About reminding people like Shaq, no matter how much money he had, no matter how much success he had earned, he was still an outsider in their world. Lucille, still silent, reached for her purse as if preparing to leave. And that was the moment Shaq made a decision. A slow smile spread across his face. Not a friendly one, but one full of challenge. You know what? He said, his voice suddenly light. You're right. We should be looking at something else. Richard's expression relaxed slightly, thinking Shaq was giving in. Shaq turned to the young sales associate who had originally helped them, the only one who had treated them with even a sliver of respect. Tell me, he said. What's the most expensive piece you have in this store? The girl blinked. The celestial diamond necklace, sir. It's, She glanced at Richard, unsure whether to continue. Shaq nodded. How much? The girl swallowed. 3.2 million. Lucille's eyes widened slightly. Shaquille? But Shaq held up a hand. Show it to us. Richard hesitated. Sir, I don't believe that's necessary. That's one of our most exclusive items, and I highly doubt... You highly doubt what? Shaq cut in, his voice still eerily calm. Richard pressed his lips together. I just don't think it's the right fit. Shaq exhaled slowly. Then he laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because this was just so predictable. He stepped forward slightly, forcing Richard to tilt his chin up to meet his gaze. Let me explain something to you, Shaq said, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of every time he'd been underestimated, every time someone had assumed they had power over him. I've played in arenas bigger than this store. I've signed checks worth more than your entire inventory. And I've spent my life being told what I should or shouldn't have. So here's what's going to happen. The store was silent now. Every customer, every employee frozen in place, watching. You're going to bring out that necklace, Shaq continued, and you're going to do it now. Richard hesitated for half a second too long. Shaq didn't blink. Or I'll walk out of here, take my business somewhere else, and make sure every single person watching this right now knows exactly how Regency Jewelers treats people like us. Richard's expression flickered. He knew what Shaq meant. People were already staring. A couple had their phones out. The shift in power was instant. Of course, sir, Richard said, his voice clipped. Right away. Within minutes, the celestial diamond necklace was brought out, a masterpiece of rare, flawless diamonds, glistening under the showroom lights. Shaq didn't even look at it. Instead, he turned to Lucille, the warmth returning to his voice. You like this one, Mama? Lucille hesitated, still rattled by everything that had happened. Shaquille, Shaq placed a hand over hers. I told you, he said softly. You deserve the best. Lucille's eyes shimmered, not because of the diamonds, but because of the son she had raised. Shaq turned back to the young sales associate. Wrap it up. The girl nodded quickly, her hands slightly shaking as she carefully placed the necklace in its box. Richard, standing stiffly to the side, forced a polite smile. Excellent choice, sir. Shaq took the box, then turned to the young associate, the only employee who had shown them respect from the beginning. What's your commission on this? He asked. She blinked in surprise. 10%, sir. Shaq smiled and handed her the box. Then you're the only one getting paid today. The associate's eyes widened. Well, wait. But sir, Shaq ignored the stunned silence around him, turning to Richard one last time. You see, Richard, he said, voice full of something close to amusement. You were right about one thing. Some things aren't meant for everyone. He glanced at the other employees, at the ones who had sneered, who had judged his mother without knowing her story. Then he smiled. And that includes my money. With that, he turned to Lucille and offered her his arm. She took it, standing tall once again. And together they walked out of Regency Jewelers, leaving behind a room full of people who had just learned a very expensive lesson. Shaq and Lucille had just turned toward the exit, the weight of the store's judgment pressing down on them, when a voice cut through the tension like a sharp blade. Wait a minute. Shaq? It came from the far side of the showroom, near a display of luxury watches. A man in a tailored navy suit turned, his expression shifting from casual interest to complete recognition. Shaq paused but didn't immediately react. He wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. But then he saw the man's face. It was David Langston, a former NBA analyst and well-known businessman. He had covered Shaq's career for years and had since built a reputation in sports media and finance. The kind of guy who walked in the same circles as the store's most elite clientele, but unlike the others, he had earned his place through hard work, not entitlement. David's grin widened. Man, it is you. What are you doing here? Shaq finally smiled, a real smile this time, and shook his head. Just trying to spoil my mama, he said, his voice calm but pointed enough for everyone to hear. David's gaze flickered toward Lucille, and his expression softened. Ms. O'Neal, he said with genuine warmth, stepping forward to shake her hand. It's an honor. Lucille, still regaining her composure from the last half hour of humiliation, smiled graciously. Oh, you're too kind, young man. David chuckled. I've covered your son's career for years, ma'am. The honor's all mine. That's when the real shift happened. Behind the counters, store employees who had been dismissive just moments ago started whispering among themselves. That's really him? Shaquille O'Neal? Are you serious? Even some customers, who had previously pretended not to notice him, were now sneaking not-so-subtle glances. A few pulled out their phones, either snapping photos or texting friends. The recognition spread like wildfire. And suddenly, the very people who had treated Shaq like a nobody were scrambling to change their tune. One of the older salesmen, who had earlier ignored Lucille's presence entirely, hurried over. His previously cold demeanor was now replaced with forced enthusiasm. Mr. O'Neal, he said smoothly, clasping his hands together. I had no idea you were… Well, if I had known, we would have ensured you received our highest level of service. Shaq let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. Oh, he said. So, you only treat people with respect if you know they got money. The salesman's smile twitched, but he quickly covered it up. No, of course not. We pride ourselves on treating all our customers with the utmost care. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Huh. Funny, 'cause I don't remember getting any of that care when we walked in. Richard, the store manager, who'd been watching the entire exchange, finally stepped forward. He had been quiet ever since Shaq called him out, likely debating whether doubling down on his arrogance was worth the risk. But now, with the whispers growing and other customers starting to notice the tension, he made his choice. Mr. O'Neal, Richard said, putting on his best damage control voice. I sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding today. That was never our intention. Shaq just stared at him. He had seen this same act play out too many times. People who only valued respect when it benefited them. Before he could respond, Victoria Harrington, who had been eerily silent during all of this, decided to speak. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "this is certainly interesting." Her confidence, once so unshakable, was now slipping. She wasn't a fool. She'd spent years carefully curating her image, navigating the world of the elite. And now, she had just publicly insulted one of the most famous athletes in the world. She needed to fix it. Fast. She turned toward Lucille, forcing a sweet but insincere smile. "I hope you didn't take my earlier comments too seriously, dear. I was just trying to give some friendly advice." Lucille tilted her head slightly, her face calm but unreadable. "Friendly advice?" Shaq repeated, his voice still controlled, but now carrying a sharper edge. Victoria laughed lightly, waving a manicured hand. "Oh, come on now. It was just a little joke. No need to be so sensitive." That was when David Langston laughed, a genuine, full-bodied laugh that immediately made Victoria's expression tighten. "You know, Victoria," David said, shaking his head, "I've met a lot of people in this city. But you?" He let out another chuckle. "You might just be the most delusional of them all." Victoria's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" David crossed his arms. "Let me get this straight. You had no idea who you were talking to, so you decided to treat them like they were beneath you. And now that you realize you made a mistake, you want to pretend it was all a joke?" Victoria's face flushed. I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered. David turned to the other customers. "You all saw it, right?" he said, his voice carrying through the store. "This woman and half the employees in here disrespected one of the greatest athletes of all time, just because they didn't recognize him." A few customers nodded, while others just watched in awkward silence. Victoria was now visibly uncomfortable. "I don't see why this is such a big deal," she said, trying to regain control. "It was an honest mistake." Shaq finally stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Mistakes happen," he said. "But this wasn't a mistake." Victoria blinked rapidly, as if trying to pretend she didn't understand. Shaq sighed, looking around. "See, what y'all don't get is that I'm used to this. I've been in places like this my whole life. Places where people look at me and my mother and assume we don't belong." His gaze shifted to Richard, the manager. "You think I don't know what you were doing? Telling us to check out another store? Acting like we couldn't afford to be here?" Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. Shaq turned back to Victoria. "And you," he said, shaking his head. "You wanted us to feel small. That's why you said what you said. You wanted to remind us that, in your world, we don't count." Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Shaq let out a slow breath. "Thing is, I don't need this place. I don't need your approval. And I damn sure don't need to prove anything to people like you." Then, without another word, he turned to his mother. "Let's go, Mama." Lucille nodded. But before she walked away, she gave Victoria one final look. And with nothing more than a simple, knowing smile, she said, "Bless your heart, darling." Then she turned and left, her head held high. Shaq followed. And as they stepped out of Regency Jewelers, leaving behind the shocked silence, Shaq knew one thing for certain. They had just taught the room a lesson they'd never forget. The tension inside Regency Jewelers was thick enough to choke on. Shaq and Lucille were standing near the exit, having already made it clear that they were done with the store's arrogance. But Shaq wasn't ready to leave just yet. Not before he made one final statement. Victoria Harrington stood stiffly near the display cases, her lips pursed, her polished nails tapping against the glass as if she were trying to ignore her own embarrassment. The store manager, Richard Davenport, remained frozen, his forced smile barely holding as he struggled to salvage the situation. The staff, who had spent the last hour judging, dismissing, and belittling Shaq and his mother, were now pretending to be polite. But politeness after humiliation wasn't respect, it was damage control. Shaq exhaled slowly, his hands in his pockets, his towering frame still relaxed, yet undeniably commanding. He could feel every single pair of eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do next. And that's when he made a decision. "You know," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "I've been to a lot of places like this. Fancy stores, elite clubs, exclusive events, and every time I see the same thing. No one moved. Even the customers, some of whom had initially joined in the judgment, were now watching, shifting uneasily. Shaq turned his gaze to Richard. People like you, he continued, love to talk about high standards, about select clientele, but let's be real. He gestured around the store. That ain't about money. It's about control. You look at people and you decide before they even say a word whether they deserve to be treated with respect. Richard swallowed, but Shaq didn't stop. My mother? Shaq gestured toward Lucille, who stood tall, unshaken. She walked in here looking for something beautiful. And you? You looked at her and thought, she doesn't belong. A ripple of unease passed through the employees. The saleswoman who had suggested Lucille go to a cheaper store dropped her gaze to the floor. Shaq let the silence settle before continuing, his voice now sharp as glass. And you know what's funny? He asked, shaking his head. The only person in this whole place who acted with any real class was her. He pointed across the store, directly at the young sales associate who had originally tried to help them. The girl's eyes widened. She had been standing near the register, watching everything unfold with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Come here, Shaq said, nodding at her. She hesitated, then slowly stepped forward. Her name tag read Emily, and her uniform, though identical to the others, didn't come with the same arrogance. Shaq smiled at her. You treated my mother with respect from the moment we walked in, he said. You didn't look at her and decide she wasn't worth your time, and you didn't switch up the second you realized who I was. Emily's face turned red. I was just doing my job, sir. Shaq chuckled. Nah, if you were just doing your job, you'd be like them. He nodded toward the other employees, who looked away uncomfortably. And then, as the entire room watched, Shaq turned back to Richard. I want you, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority, to personally assist my mother now. Richard's mouth opened slightly, as if he were about to argue. But something in Shaq's expression made him think twice. His jaw tightened, his pride clearly wounded, but he gave a stiff nod. Of course, sir, he said, his voice strained. He turned toward Lucille. Ma'am, is there anything else you'd like to see today? Lucille, ever the graceful woman, smiled lightly. No, thank you, she said. My son already gave me the greatest gift today. Richard exhaled, looking relieved that the situation was nearly over. But Shaq? He wasn't done. Actually, Shaq said casually, turning back to Emily. You said earlier that the most expensive set in the store is the Celestial Diamond Collection, right? Emily nodded. Yes, sir. Shaq glanced toward the ornate, velvet-lined case where the set was displayed. The celestial diamonds were worth a fortune, an entire matching set of flawless stones, crafted for royalty. Shaq turned back to Richard. I'll take it. A wave of stunned silence rippled through the room. Richard blinked rapidly, struggling to process what had just been said. You'd like to purchase the Celestial Collection? Shaq nodded. Yup. Richard forced a polite chuckle, assuming the moment had diffused. Of course. A wonderful choice. I'll have it wrapped up for your mother immediately. But then Shaq's smile widened just slightly. Nah, he said, shaking his head. Not for my mother. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Richard frowned. I'm sorry? Shaq looked at Emily. It's for her. Emily's jaw dropped. What? She breathed, completely stunned. Shaq grinned. You heard me. Wrap it up for Emily. A gasp came from somewhere in the store. Victoria visibly stiffened, her nails digging into her purse strap. Richard looked horrified, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Emily, however, looked almost panicked. Sir, I can't, she stammered. Shaq held up a hand, cutting her off. You ever owned diamonds before, Emily? She shook her head furiously. Of course not, sir. Well, Shaq said. Now you do. Emily's eyes welled with tears, her hands covering her mouth. I don't even know what to say. Shaq chuckled. Then don't say anything. He turned to Richard one last time. Just do what you do best. Wrap it up. Richard's face was an unreadable mix of resentment and forced professionalism. But he gave a tight nod and signaled for another associate to bring out the set. As the store scrambled to process the most expensive sale of the day, Shaq turned back to Emily, his voice softer now. "You know why I did that?" he asked. She wiped at her eyes, still overwhelmed. "Because I treated you with respect?" Shaq nodded. "Yeah. But more than that?" He smiled. "Because I can." Emily laughed through her tears, and the energy in the store shifted completely. The wealthy customers who had once scoffed were now whispering amongst themselves. Some smiled, others looked away, uncomfortable with the reality of what they had just witnessed. And Victoria? She had never looked smaller. As the transaction finalized, Shaq reached for the box and personally handed it to Emily. "Enjoy 'em," he said. Emily looked like she might faint. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Shaq patted her shoulder, then turned to his mother. "Ready, Mama?" Lucille, watching the entire scene unfold with pride in her eyes, looped her arm through his. "Yes, baby," she said. "Let's go." And with that, Shaq and Lucille walked out of Regency Jewelers, leaving behind a room full of people who had just learned something priceless. A lesson about character, about dignity, about the difference between real wealth and an expensive price tag, and most importantly, a lesson about who really belonged. The moment Shaq and Lucille stepped out of Regency Jewelers, the world outside felt lighter, as if they had walked away from a storm that was still raging inside. The doors shut behind them, but inside the tension didn't dissolve. It was only just beginning. Because what Victoria Harrington and the store employees hadn't realized, what they had been too arrogant to notice, was that several customers had recorded the entire thing. And now, it was spreading fast. The first video hit Twitter within minutes. A customer, a young woman named Rachel Carter, had caught everything. From the moment Victoria sneered at Lucille to the exact second Shaq flipped the script on everyone. Her caption was simple, but cutting. "Imagine being this racist and realizing you just insulted Shaq. Couldn't be me. Regency Jewelers. Disgusting." The footage was crystal clear. Victoria's mocking laughter, Richard's thinly veiled arrogance, the staff's subtle dismissals, all of it laid out for the world to see. Within 20 minutes, the clip had over 100,000 views. By the 1-hour mark, it had been shared across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, gaining momentum like an avalanche. And the internet? It was merciless. The comments flooded in at lightning speed. NBA Fanatic 23. "Nah, imagine trying to embarrass Shaq's mom? Y'all deserve everything coming to you. Justice for Lucille. This isn't just about Shaq. His mother deserved respect from the start. That store's about to learn the hard way. Millionaire mindset. This is why real money moves silently. Old money elites think they run the world, but respect isn't bought. It's earned." The story hit Reddit, where a thread in our public freakout skyrocketed to the top of the page. People dug into Regency Jewelers' history, finding past complaints of discrimination, elitism, and shady business practices. And then, the celebrities got involved. Shaq hadn't even left the shopping district when his phone started blowing up. His agent, his publicist, even some of his NBA friends were texting nonstop. "Bro, you're trending #1 on Twitter. Have you seen the video yet? That woman is finished. Yo, they're already digging up dirt on that store. It's bad." Shaq glanced at Lucille, who was oblivious to the chaos unfolding online. She was still holding his arm, smiling warmly as they walked toward the car, enjoying the fresh air. Shaq sighed, shaking his head. "Mama," he said, unlocking the door for her. "I think we just started something big." Lucille raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What now?" Shaq pulled out his phone, showing her the screen. Thousands of notifications, thousands of comments, and the hashtags. Respect. Lucille. Regency exposed. Shaq taught him. Lucille's eyes widened. "Oh, Lord," she muttered. "I don't even know what a hashtag is, but I don't think they're happy." Shaq chuckled. "No, Mama, they ain't." Victoria's meltdown. Back inside Regency Jewelers, Victoria Harrington was unraveling. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, Texts from friends, family, even acquaintances asking if she had seen the video. What video? She snapped at one of her socialite friends. Her friend winced. The one where you, kind of... Victoria snatched the phone out of her hand. And there it was. Her own face, her own voice, mocking Shaq's mother. The way she had looked so smug, so confident, only to be completely dismantled by Shaq in front of everyone. The comment section was brutal. Exposing Karen. Oh, Victoria's been like this. I went to school with her. She used to say the wildest stuff about keeping certain people out of high society. Luxury, but make it classy. Victoria gives rich but insecure vibes, the kind that needs to put others down to feel important. Karma hits hard. Ma'am, I know you're reading these. We all know. Victoria felt her stomach drop. Her perfectly curated image, the one she had spent years building, was crumbling in real time. Regency's PR nightmare. If Victoria was panicking, then Richard Davenport, the store manager, was losing his mind. The corporate office had already called 3 times. Emails were flooding in. The store's Instagram page, bombarded with thousands of comments. Snow class jewelry. Y'all really thought y'all could get away with this? Fire Davenport. Discrimination isn't high standards. It's ugly. And now the world sees you. Shaq for president. Shaq should buy the whole store and turn it into a basketball court. Richard rubbed his temples, staring at the disaster unfolding online. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, the phone rang again. He hesitated, then answered. This is Richard Davenport. The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped, and very, very angry. Richard, the corporate executive snapped. What the hell did you do? Richard closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? The executive's voice was pure rage. You insulted one of the most beloved public figures in America. Do you know what that means? Richard swallowed hard. I can fix this. We'll issue a statement. Fix it? The executive let out a cold laugh. Richard, we're done. You're done. You're fired. Richard felt his entire world collapse. And then, the call ended. Meanwhile, Shaq and Lucille had made it home. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light over their front yard as they sat on the porch. Lucille sipped her tea, shaking her head. I never thought buying a necklace would cause all this drama. Shaq laughed. You and me both, Mama. His phone buzzed again, his publicist calling. He debated ignoring it, but finally picked up. Shaq, his publicist said, voice urgent. Do you want to respond to all this? Everyone's waiting to hear what you have to say. Shaq thought for a moment, then grinned. Nah, he said. They already know. And just like that, the internet kept the fight going for him. Because in the end, Shaq didn't need to say anything else. The world had already spoken. The evening air was crisp as Shaq and Lucille stepped onto the sidewalk, leaving behind the golden glow of Regency jewelers and all the arrogance trapped inside it. The tension of the past hour still lingered, but they walked out with their dignity intact, heads high, shoulders squared, unshaken. Lucille let out a slow breath, as if shaking off the weight of everything that had happened. Well, she murmured, adjusting her purse strap, that was an experience. Shaq chuckled, running a hand over his bald head. Yeah, Mama, it was. Lucille glanced at the small gift bag in her hand, a far different box than what she had originally admired. The Celestial Diamond Collection, worth millions, wasn't for her. It had been given to someone who had actually earned it. And that alone was the most powerful statement Shaq could have made. Lucille reached over, patting his arm gently. I'm proud of you, baby. Shaq smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I learned from the best. But inside Regency Jewelers, the storm was just beginning. As Shaq and Lucille walked away inside the store, Emily, the young sales associate who had received the unexpected gift, stood frozen in place. Her fingers clutched the luxurious jewelry box, still in shock, her heart pounding against her ribs. I can't believe this, she whispered, staring down at the extravagant diamonds inside. The other employees, the ones who had dismissed her as just another low-level worker, were staring too, some envious, some ashamed. Victoria Harrington, still standing near the glass counters, scoffed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Well, that's just ridiculous," she muttered. "Giving something so valuable to a store clerk? He's making a joke out of the whole thing." Emily's head snapped up, and for the first time that evening, she wasn't timid anymore. "It's not a joke," she said firmly, gripping the box tighter. "It's what real generosity looks like. Something you wouldn't understand." Victoria's face twitched, her jaw tightening. But before she could snap back, Emily turned and walked toward the stockroom. She didn't need to waste another second on people like Victoria Harrington. By the time Victoria stormed out of the store, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The fallout from the viral video was spreading faster than she could control. She climbed into the back seat of her black luxury SUV, slamming the door shut. "Drive!" she snapped at her chauffeur, scrolling furiously through her phone. Her name was everywhere. Screenshots, videos, even old stories from people who had known her before, resurfacing to confirm what the world now knew. Victoria Harrington wasn't just a snob. She was a full-fledged elitist with a history of looking down on others. And the worst part? Her own social circle, the wealthy elite she had always relied on, were turning against her. A message popped up in one of her exclusive group chats, filled with New York's most influential socialites and businesswomen. Bianca Montrose. "Victoria, please tell me this isn't real. The video looks awful. Madeline Foster. I can't believe you'd behave like this. My family is distancing from you immediately. This is humiliating. Carla Winslow. Not to be dramatic, but your reputation is finished." Victoria's hands tightened around her phone. These women weren't just acquaintances. They were the gatekeepers to the world she lived in. And now, one by one, they were cutting her off. She tried to respond, but every message she typed felt weak, pathetic. Nothing she could say would erase what was on that video. And then, one final text appeared. Bianca Montrose. "By the way, Regency Jewelers just dropped your brand sponsorship. They don't want to be associated with you anymore." Victoria felt the air leave her lungs. This couldn't be happening. She had spent years crafting her image, climbing the social ladder with meticulous care. But in a single evening, one mistake, one moment of arrogance too many. And it was all falling apart. And the worst part? She had done it to herself. Meanwhile, inside Regency Jewelers' corporate offices, chaos reigned. Emails flooded in. Calls from news outlets wouldn't stop ringing. Their public relations team was scrambling to contain the PR disaster of the decade. A hastily written statement was posted on their Instagram page within hours. "At Regency Jewelers, we believe in inclusivity and respect for all our customers. We deeply regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred and are committed to making changes to ensure a welcoming environment for everyone." The comments immediately erupted. Call them out. Not you calling blatant racism a misunderstanding. Luxury, with integrity. Maybe try treating all customers with respect and not just millionaires next time. Shaq did it right. Too late, the world saw what happened. But the real blow came when they tried to reach out to Shaq himself. An executive from their corporate office called Shaq's agent, trying to smooth things over. "We'd love to extend a formal invitation for Mr. O'Neal to return to our flagship store," the executive said, forcing a pleasant tone. "We'd like to offer him an exclusive VIP membership, complete with private shopping experiences, priority service, and..." Shaq's agent laughed mid-call. "Let me stop you right there," he said. "Shaq doesn't need your VIP treatment. He doesn't need your free champagne or your fake apologies." The executive hesitated. "Perhaps we could discuss a brand partnership? A sponsorship deal to..." Shaq's agent ended the call. Regency Jewelers was desperate to fix their reputation, but Shaq didn't need a deal. He needed them to learn a lesson. The next day, Shaq sat on his mother's porch, scrolling through the aftermath. His name was still trending, but for all the right reasons. The internet had taken his stand for dignity and respect and turned it into something bigger. A reminder that no amount of wealth or status could replace kindness and integrity. Lucille came outside, sitting beside him with a cup of tea. "Still blowing up, huh?" she asked, glancing at his phone. Shaq grinned. Oh yeah? She shook her head, taking a sip. And what do you think about all this? Shaq thought for a moment, then put his phone down. I think money can buy a lot of things, he said. But it sure as hell can't buy class. Lucille smiled, nodding. That's my boy. Shaq stretched, exhaling as he soaked in the peace of home. The world could keep talking, keep debating, keep dissecting every detail of what had happened in Regency Jewelers. But at the end of the day, Shaq and Lucille had walked away with something far more valuable than diamonds. They walked away knowing exactly who they were. The world had moved on, as it always did. The news cycle, social media, and the chaos surrounding Regency Jewelers had burned hot for days. But just like any wildfire, it eventually burned out. The store had suffered massive public backlash, their reputation permanently stained. Victoria Harrington had faded into irrelevance, her name now attached to humiliation rather than high society. But for Shaq and Lucille, this had never been about headlines, it was about respect. And as the dust settled, Shaq found himself back where he truly felt at peace. Home. The evening sky stretched wide over Lucille's front porch, painted in soft shades of orange and purple. The air was cool, carrying the distant sound of kids laughing down the street and the faint smell of barbecue from a neighbor's backyard. Lucille sat in her favorite rocking chair, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Shaq sat beside her, his long legs stretched out, his massive hands resting on his stomach. He looked at ease, as if the weight of the past week had finally lifted. For a while, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. But then Lucille sighed, setting her tea down on the small wooden table between them. You know, she said, turning to him with a knowing smile, when you were a little boy, you used to get in so much trouble standing up for people. Shaq chuckled, already knowing where this was going. Oh, I remember. Lucille shook her head. Anytime you saw some kid getting picked on, you stepped right in. Didn't matter if they were half your size or twice your size. And Lord, when you got mad. Whew. She let out a soft laugh. It used to scare me, Shaquille. Not 'cause I thought you'd ever hurt someone, but 'cause I worried the world would try to break that kindness out of you. Shaq looked at her, his smile fading slightly. Lucille sighed. The world doesn't like it when a strong man chooses patience over power, she murmured. They expect you to lash out, to prove yourself with your fists instead of your mind. But you didn't do that. Not back then. Not in that store. She reached over, placing a hand on his. And that's why I'm proud of you. Shaq swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. I wanted to, Mama, he admitted after a long pause. I wanted to tell them off the second we walked in. Lucille nodded, unsurprised. I know. But I kept thinking about you, Shaq continued. How you used to say that real power isn't about who you can put down, it's about who you can lift up. Lucille squeezed his hand. And that's exactly what you did. Shaq leaned back in his chair, gazing up at the sky. You know what's crazy, Mama? What's that, baby? All those people in that store. They thought they had everything. Money, status, influence. He shook his head. But they had nothing. Not really. Lucille hummed in agreement. Ain't that the truth? Shaq exhaled, thinking back to the moment in Regency Jewelers when he had watched the store manager, the staff, even Victoria scramble to change their behavior once they realized who he was. That's what bothered me the most, Shaq admitted. Not the insults, not the judgment, but the fact that the second they realized I was worth money, they switched up. He shook his head. Like respect was something you had to buy instead of something you give freely. Lucille sighed. That's the world for you, baby. Some folks only know how to treat people right when there's something in it for them. Shaq looked over at her. You ever feel like that when I was growing up? Lucille tilted her head slightly, as if debating how much to say. Then she nodded. All the time, she admitted. When you were little, people didn't give me the time of day. I was just a woman trying to make ends meet, trying to raise her boy right. But the second you got famous, oh, suddenly everyone was my best friend. Suddenly I was worth noticing. Shaq felt a familiar burn in his chest, the same anger he had carried since he was a kid. Anger at a world that only valued people based on what they could offer, rather than who they were. But Lucille, she wasn't angry. She was just at peace with the truth. That's why I never let money change me, she continued, tapping his knee gently. And I made sure you wouldn't either. Shaq smiled, shaking his head. Well, you definitely made sure of that. Lucille chuckled. Darn right I did. A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind only a mother and son could share. Finally, Lucille sat up a little straighter, looking at Shaq with that sharp, wise gaze she had always carried. You did good, Shaquille, she said. But I need you to remember something. Shaq turned to her, giving his full attention. There will always be people like them, she said softly. People who think money makes them better. People who think status gives them the right to treat others like nothing. She reached for his hand again, her grip firm. But you? You proved something that day. You showed them, and the whole world, that real wealth isn't about what's in your bank account. She smiled. It's about who you are when nobody's watching. Shaq let her words sink in, feeling them settle deep. He thought about Emily, the young sales associate, walking out of that store with more than just a diamond set, walking out with dignity, with recognition. He thought about the people online, the ones who had seen what happened and demanded justice, proving that there were still those who believed in right and wrong, not just rich and poor. He thought about Victoria Harrington, sitting somewhere in her mansion, surrounded by luxury but utterly alone, because no amount of wealth could erase who she had been exposed to be. And then, he thought about his mother, the woman who had given him everything, even when she had nothing. Shaq nodded slowly. You're right, Mama. Lucille smirked. I usually am. Shaq stretched, then stood, offering his hand to his mother. Come on, let's go inside. I think I still got some leftovers in the fridge. Lucille stood, dusting off her hands. Lord, I hope it's not that dry chicken you made last night. Shaq laughed loudly, shaking his head. Man, you're ruthless. She patted his back as they walked inside. Just keeping you humble, baby. And that was the real victory. Not the headlines. Not the viral moment. Not even the way Regency jewelers had to face the consequences of their actions. The victory was this: a mother and son, standing together, walking away from a world that had tried to judge them, tried to define their worth. And in the end, they had won. Because wealth fades. Diamonds lose their shine. Status comes and goes. But dignity, respect, knowing exactly who you are no matter what the world throws at you, that's forever. Money fades. Status comes and goes. But respect, that lasts forever. If this story made you think twice about what true wealth really is, then you're already ahead of the game. Stay sharp. Stay aware. And most importantly, always pay attention to who treats you with dignity before they know your worth.